I'm Tato Cat. Welcome to my channel. Today we are playing Asphyxia. Previously, we destroyed our chance of finding help because of a fight. We got into a fight because we said our ex-bestie's name in front of her current bestie, and now she's kind of disowning us. Yeah, that's fun. And that's pretty much where we left off. Alright, let's continue. Even after she had shouted so hard her vocal cords threatened to tear, her words had not been unprecedented, unmediated. Roberta had meant what she said, down to the very last syllable. Maybe Samantha had been pushing it too far these last few weeks. Now Roberta didn't even want to be her friend anymore, just like Lillian before her. Once people grew to know Samantha well enough, they began to realize Samantha's cheerful smiles and self-effacing barbs were all for show. She could be funny, yes, and charming too. But underneath it all, she was neurotic, anxious, perpetually troubled. For most people, it was too much to deal with. Roberta had been able to bear with Samantha's melancholy moods better than most, but it seemed Samantha had finally exhausted her patience. Roberta hated her now. Maybe she had hated her for a long time, but had been too polite to tell her. At least Samantha thought, with a heavy heart. She knew the truth now. The truth, or so people like to say, was a beautiful thing. But it hurt so much. Samantha found she couldn't appreciate it. Samantha's simple. It took her a few moments to realize she was crying. Her tears, hot and salty, dripped down her cheeks, cooling fast from the cold wind. There was no remorse to be had, not from Lillian, not from Roberta, not from herself either. She couldn't refute Roberta's claims. How could she when Roberta was telling the truth? She was a pain, a burden. Maybe she shouldn't have gone on this trip to begin with. Maybe it would have been better if she had spent these 2 days holed up in her bedroom alone, lying under her duvet, with her eyes closed, pretending to be dead. That way, she wouldn't be able to upset anyone. So, this was for the best, right? It would make everybody happier. Tears of the size of penny pieces dripping down her cheeks, Samantha turned and ran. Well, this can't be good. She didn't know where she was going, but that was fine. She hadn't known where she was beforehand anyway. And anywhere, absolutely anywhere, would be better than being with Roberta, being scrutinized under her cold, passionless gaze, which held not a single shred of compassion. Samantha wished only that she could run away from herself too. But this was an impossibility, no matter how furious her footsteps. She could never hope to outpace her own head. Wow, I agree. Wow, Georgia whistled. Now that was something else. I felt like I was in the middle of a soap opera. Roberta trembled with her face white. She had already said things, horrible things, that she couldn't take back. It hadn't even been because she was mad at Samantha, not really. Although it was true, these lingering resentments had been building up, unchecked within her for quite some time, like cobwebs in an old abandoned house. Although Samantha had been grating on Roberta's patience, and Roberta had been meaning to have a serious talk with the other girl for a while now, this had unknowingly been a bad time to hold that discussion. Particularly when it had not been a discussion, so much as a one-sided verbal assault, which Samantha had been incapable of dealing with. Roberta sighed, running one hand across her hair. She hadn't lost her temper like that in a long while, and now she was suffering the consequences. Samantha had run away to goodness knew where, and Roberta had no idea how she would ever find her. If she turns up later hanging from a tree branch, at least we'll know who to blame. Percy and I are witnesses. We can give evidence. That isn't funny, Georgia. Roberta's shoulders tensed. Don't be ridiculous. Sam isn't going to kill herself. You say that, but Samantha is rather pathetic, don't you think? If anybody in her class was to commit suicide, she seems to be the most likely candidate. Why are you saying this so cheerfully? This is like a serious thing. You don't, like, joke about that sort of thing. Because it's true. Like, clearly this is a very depressed girl dealing with shit, you know? And you're just like, whoa, ha ha ha. She will kill herself, you know? And like, don't do that. Roberta winced. Cruel though her words were, Georgia did have a point. Samantha had never been the most resilient person. Don't feel too bad though, Bobby. Samantha's always been a bit of a wreck. Hasn't she been depressed for ages? It's hard to tell, given she makes so many jokes about it, but... That means she's depressed. Depressed people make jokes about being depressed because they're depressed. Percy frowned. Her fingers wound tightly about the strap of her messenger bag. I don't think she's a particularly happy person. There, you see? Everything's worked out rather well. Samantha's obviously too much of a coward to kill herself without a push in the right direction, so I might have done her a favor. Oh my goodness, Georgia is just like the worst. Georgia. Roberta held a hand to her mouth. She looked, and indeed felt, like she was going to be sick. Please don't say that. I feel terrible. It's no use getting a conscience now, Bobby. What's done is done. You can't change the past. Oh God. Roberta buried her head in her hands. Why did Georgia have to sound so gleeful? Her tastes really were macabre. Well... Georgia paused. It's not like I don't understand how you feel, Bobby. I can be pretty horrible sometimes, but I suppose I have to give credit where credit is due, even to you. Sometimes you can be pretty horrible, sometimes? Okay. More like all the time, but sure. Taking care of Sam day in, day out must be quite a chore. I hardly even know the girl, and she infuriates me. I think it's impressive that you've put up with her for as long as you have, Bobby. And if I'm being honest, it was rather exhilarating seeing you get that worked up. I've never heard you shout like that before. For a moment there, you actually sounded passionate. And look what good it's done me. Passion, at the end of the day, only creates problems. Perhaps, but life would be far less enjoyable without it. I think it suits you. I don't know about that. I do. Take my word for it. I don't hand out compliments easily. I'm awfully stingy with them. And, I guess since the whole thing was mostly my fault, I'm sorry. Roberta let her hands fall from her face. A small, tentative smile began to tug on the corners of her lips. Maybe Georgia wasn't that bad after all. No, she's terrible. Well, thank you? Don't mention it. I'm beginning to get a little worried, though. Worried? You? I hardly believe it. There's a first time for everything. I've been thinking. Georgia placed one hand underneath her chin, pondering. If Samantha really does die, do you think I would be an accessory to the crime? I like that scratch there. Fit perfectly. Instantly, any goodwill Roberta might have felt toward Georgia was snuffed, like a candle being blown out. You're not sorry at all. You two-faced liar. Why I ought to... Roberta began, but her tirade was soon cut short by an electronic jingle emitting from her pocket. Beep beep, it says. Oh! Roberta jumped, quite taken by surprise. It was her phone. Though it had been much abused during the last half hour, it seemed it had some fights in it still. That, or had been possessed by an unruly spirit. Whatever the case, however, its chirping made one thing clear. It had been bestowed with a second lease of life. They were saved, but Roberta could take no real pleasure in this. Her phone's resurrection had come too late. Where in the world had Samantha gone? Yes, where have we gone? Oh no. Fears in solitude. Dun dun dun. Samantha ran as fast as her legs would carry her. She didn't know where she was going, and she didn't care. She just wanted to get away, to escape. What she wanted to escape from, however, she knew she could never leave. How could she ever hope to part from her own mind? Her mind was what made her who she was, diseased though it might have been. She could never leave it. The wind ran through Samantha's hair and stung her cheeks, painting them red. A sharp metallic taste filled her mouth. Saliva rose to her throat, sharp and bitter. She tried to swallow it down, but it only made her feel worse. Her stomach hurt. It felt like a small monster was nesting inside her, tearing at her insides with its sharp claws and serrated teeth. She winced, coming to a halt by a large tree. She pressed one palm to its bark, which felt comfortably solid against her skin, and doubled over. Tears began to gather in her eyes, sharp and salty. Samantha never seemed to run out of tears. She was like a banshee. She could cry for hours, and she didn't even need a reason to. Sometimes she broke down while doing the most mundane of tasks, balling her socks or brushing her teeth, and she had no idea why. She didn't understand what she did or felt, or thought more than half of the things she did. Samantha's stomach churned. Unpleasant aftertaste of those highly caffeinated energy drinks was coming back to haunt her. Roberta had been right. She shouldn't have drunk so much. Why was she so stupid? It was no wonder Georgia made fun of her, that Roberta got mad at her, that Lillian hated her. New tears began to trickle down Samantha's cheeks. Her stomach hurt, and alarmed, she found that she couldn't breathe. Was she having a panic attack? Maybe it's because she was going to be sick and she didn't want to be. She didn't have to be. She was stronger than that. She was. Wasn't she? Probably not. Her throat burned. Her mouth kept filling with bile despite her efforts to swallow it back down. She leant her body against the nearby tree trunk, pressing her hand against it, hard for support. Her palm hurt. Had she scratched it against the tree? Maybe she was bleeding. She didn't know. What she did know, however, was that approximately 5 seconds later, she was sick, horribly, painfully, seemingly endlessly sick. Her chest heaved, as did her stomach, as she regurgitated everything she had eaten during the last 8 hours onto the ground. Thankfully, what she had eaten didn't constitute very much. Her vomit was clear, almost entirely liquid, but it still burnt her throat when it came back up. Oh well, never mind. She had experienced worse. Samantha wiped her chin with the back of her arm and straightened up, or at least she attempted to. The moment she did, she was attacked by a sudden spell of dizziness that almost knocked her off her feet. Maybe she should have gotten more sleep last night. Why hadn't she gotten more sleep? Samantha liked sleeping. It was one of her favorite states of being. Falling asleep had, however, been hard as of late. Being Samantha in general was hard, but these last 3 months had been more painful than most. Samantha sniffed and wiped her eyes. They felt red and raw, and rubbing them only made them hurt. Now her nausea had faded. She felt better equipped to examine her surroundings. Where in the world was she? Near a lake, it looks like. And some blurry trees. And some blurry grass. Samantha peeked out from behind the tree trunk she had been leaning against and glanced about. Beyond the tree, its boughs stripped bare from the winter's ravages, she could see a lake. Its surface was dark and murky, like black tea left inside a teacup to go cold. She's not going to go drown herself in the lake, is she? Please don't. The wind whistled over the top of the water, making it ripple. It was pretty soothing, even. Other people might have deemed this sight decidedly unremarkable and walked on. but Samantha had always found these visions of nature comforting. Maybe it's because of her childhood, it reminded her of home. The quiet of the countryside and the absence of all other human life made her feel like an explorer on a newly discovered alien planet. Samantha preferred it out here. She found it much more agreeable than the city. Being alone, surrounded by trees, even trees that were recovering from a particularly cold winter, their boughs gnarled and naked, was comforting. If she really did die here, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. She preferred dying here out in the open, surrounded by the smell of dirt and earth and wildflowers, than back in her tiny room in London. If she died in London, she would have no peace. Her soul would be besieged by countless others who had met similar fates, alone in apartments with no friends or family, and she would become one of many, another statistic in the nameless, faceless sea. In the countryside, she could be herself. She could be Samantha. When she died, she would prefer to do so out here. But as it soon transpired, Samantha would not be given the opportunity to pull herself out of existence, not this time. The lake was not quite so secluded as once she had thought. There was somebody else there. Samantha could see out in the distance a distinctly humanoid figure standing amongst the gently flowing waters. Even from a few feet, with their backs facing, Samantha could tell this person was beautiful. Their long, blonde hair fluttering in the breeze attested as much. Though the sun was muted, hidden behind the thick layer of gray clouds, was a little light that was able to filter down to the ground seemed to be directed around this single figure. So her cornflower hair shimmered. The mystery girl seemed completely at ease in her surroundings, as though she belonged there, was one with the landscape itself. Samantha felt as though she was staring at a canvas, and this girl was part of it. This is really pretty, by the way. Really nice artwork. To remove the girl from the scene, you would need to cut a hole out of the lake itself, leaving a vast scar of abject nothingness running through the countryside. Samantha did wonder, though, what kind of person would paddle in the middle of a freezing lake in early March? Wouldn't she catch a cold? It didn't seem very sensible. Maybe this beautiful girl wasn't a human after all. She could just as easily have been an elf or a fairy, a magical creature descended to Earth from an enchanted Sylvan kingdom. Samantha stood there, staring, watching. Her heart hammered painfully inside her chest, threatening to splinter her ribs. Her heart was working too hard and, as a result, was beating much too loudly. What if the mystery girl heard her? What would happen then? Would she cast a spell on her? Bewitch her? If so, it was too late. Samantha was already enchanted. Maybe the beating of her heart really had been that loud after all. The girl out in the lake shifted her head suddenly, like a rabbit alerted to the sound of an approaching predator. And as if in slow motion, she turned. Samantha's eyes met the girl's, and when they did, she gasped. She knew now who the girl was. She was no fairy, though she looked like one, with her fair hair and blue eyes. Her blue eyes? Blue eyes? Okay, game. Her skin so pale, it appeared almost translucent. It was Lillian. Well, this is nice. I suppose so. Lillian had tied her blonde hair up once more and was now wearing the rest of her St. Mary's uniform, which she had previously folded beneath a tree before she went paddling. Unlike Samantha, Lillian was a sensible person. Of course, she'd have ensured her pinafore and cardigan didn't get wet. Samantha should have expected nothing else. The two girls were sitting beneath a tree a few yards away from the one Samantha had initially paused at, which Samantha was glad for. Samantha didn't want Lillian realizing just how sick she had been before she had stumbled across her. That would be incredibly embarrassing, and it would hardly be the best way of making a fresh first impression. It was so unfair. Lillian got to return to Samantha's life as a vision of loveliness, an indirect figure almost like a will-o-wisp, a haunting, magical creature too breathtaking to be considered truly human. Samantha, on the other hand, must have looked like a walking, talking disaster. She had just been sick, and though she had managed to wipe the incriminating evidence away with her arm, her red, puffy eyes betrayed her earlier tears. Her short hair, snipped by her own inexpert fingers, had never felt more ridiculously embarrassingly exposing. Lillian always did tell her she was easy to read. So transparent, her skin might as well have been see-through. Lillian, meanwhile, was an aloof, distant kind of figure. Her small smiles, on the rare occasions she summoned them forth, carefully constructed. Lillian never came to class late, and she always remembered to brush her hair, and she wore her school uniform with such precision she could almost be termed as a living work of art. The gulf between the two girls had never felt as pronounced as it did now. It was little wonder Samantha reiterated gloomily that Lillian had stopped being her friend. They really were polar opposites. The biggest mystery, or so Samantha mused, was why Lillian ever deigned to be her friend in the first place. What had possessed her to indulge in a relationship as theirs, which seemed destined only for failure? Lillian Wordsworth did not busy herself with affairs which seemed likely to fall apart. She was too sensible for that. She was much, much more sensible than Samantha. How had they ever become as close as they had? Samantha couldn't understand it. Samantha looked about, searching for something to say, but in vain. The words wouldn't come. Agreed. She grit her teeth together. Why couldn't she think of anything to say? She was usually good at table talk. It was true her skills had been getting a little rusty through disuse lately, but surely she had one or two interesting ideas knocking around inside her skull. Wasn't she supposed to be intelligent? Not a genius, not by any stretch of the imagination. She was not like Lillian, but at least competently clever. She had even read Kant and understood most of it too. Not Kant. What cause did she have for concern? Her previous conversations with Lillian had gone well, even if it had lasted a little more than a minute. Samantha knew she ought to calm down. She took a deep breath and tried to gather whatever wits she still possessed. There was no need for her to panic, not with Lillian. Weren't they supposed, despite their differences, to be friends? Really is a coincidence seeing you here. Do you think so? Lillian frowned, her reply cool and concise, in a manner Samantha could never hope to match. I disagree. I just didn't expect to run into you. Well, we came here on the school trip. It was inevitable that we would see one another again at some point. I suppose so. You're not in my study group though, so Samantha fiddled with her skirt, smoothing out the wrinkles in the pale blue fabric beneath her trembling fingers. I doubt I would get the chance. Oh, speaking of which, something suddenly occurred to Samantha. Where's the rest of your group? You didn't get lost too, did you? No, I didn't. I simply went off on my own for a while. Why? Lillian sighed. Because I had the misfortune of being in a group with one of the most irritating people I know. Even more irritating than me? Lillian couldn't help but smile at this comment, as much as she tried to maintain her carefully distant expression. Although Samantha could be an incredibly irritating person when she put her mind to it, and she was more than capable of accomplishing this task when she did not, there was no denying Her company could, on occasion, be amusing. Yes, indeed, this person is much more irritating, even than you. It's hard to believe. I know, but it's true. Okay, we'll end this episode here. Yay, we did not throw ourselves into the water like Ophelia and drown with our dress and flowers and whatnot, all Hamlety. Yay us. But yeah, we'll see what happens in the next episode. I am TatoCat. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon.